There's a certain kind of American who genuinely believes that they do not live a privileged life and that their life is perhaps so difficult they shouldn't even have children and continue their bloodline. And I just want to quickly do the math on that. So to you, privileged American, whoever may be listening, let's think about this. Is your life easier than that of a medieval peasant who froze his ass off all winter and worked in the fields and paid tons of taxes to a medieval lord and had no rights and was illiterate and enjoyed very little entertainment outside singing and drinking in a local tavern, if he was lucky? Okay, your life is easier than that? You admit it? Okay, is your life easier than the millions of people that live on the African continent, all of which have a GDP per capita that is roughly, I don't know, 1/10 of your average GDP per capita, and they all live under extremely corrupt governments, most of which have dictators and have been ruled by dictators for many years, have endured civil wars where almost every single family has lost someone to those civil wars, and they probably don't have great prospects into the future because of other harder limits, such as a lack of rivers, a lack of navigable ocean nearby, a lack of good placement on trade routes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so your life is easier than those people in Africa? Okay, let's move on. Is your life easier than people in Europe? Now, here's where it gets dicey. Did you know that England's GDP per capita is almost half of America's? Did you know that England is pretty close in comparison to Alabama, one of the poorest states in the United States? Did you realize that the crime rates, outside of gun crime, of course, separate issue, I'll give you that one, is relatively similar in that the crimes in London and England are on par with those in large American cities, and that there's in fact a youth problem wherein young people are actually more likely in England and some of these European countries to participate in the kind of nefarious youngster gang activities than the United States. Okay, so you'll admit that your life is easier and that your conditions are generally better than most people in Europe. Okay, well, what about people in Scandinavia? Well, sure, their life might be easier than yours, outside of the freezing temperatures and the fact that they're almost completely homogeneous and that many of them are placed on huge reserves of oil and have been given incredibly stable governments based on geographical locations, meaning that they were not often invaded and have been relatively stable and also been protected by larger countries for much of their modern history and not destroyed in World War II. Yes, they had those few advantages, but that aside, I'll give it to you. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they might have it better than you. Let me ask you this. Is it worth it for a Danish couple to raise kids? Or is their life also too hard to justify continuing the human race? I'm not sure. But all that said, how many people is that? Let's see, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. All right, let's call it 25 million. It's probably less than that, but okay, 25 million people have it better than you. Not thinking about all the poor people that live there in tiny villages in the fjords or whatever, but that's a separate issue. Now, Asia, well, China, the one that is supposed to supersede America and do better, well, their GDP per capita is what, I think like 17K, 23K versus America 77. And I know everyone's going to say GDP per capita doesn't measure anything. Well, please tell that to the people living in these C-tier Chinese cities, working 12 hours a day for much less than the American middle wage in tiny box apartments, with a government that has systems such as the social credit system, which you know all about. I'm sure you can get behind me on this one. The kind of people that think that America's horrible also understand that China's not so great either. They usually understand that much at least. In the Middle East, well, I think you understand why you as an American living in, I don't know, Boston, have it a little bit better than someone living in the Middle East. Let's say Kabul. You probably have it a little bit better than them. Those slightly, unstable regions with a slight dearth of natural resources, with a kind of a lot of desert and kind of a lot of illiteracy and lots of other issues, which you and your young country, which won World War II and became the world power, didn't have to deal with. Lucky you. Is there anyone I've left out? Antarctica? Well, yeah, you probably have an easier life than the 5,000 scientists in Antarctica. And then there's all the other people that lived in the past where they had dentists without anesthesia and they had, no work laws whatsoever, no child protection laws. Every child was abused. 1 out of every 5 children died. Barbers did surgeries so you would have your liver cut out by like a barber with no anesthesia. That wouldn't be too nice. So yeah, most of history was pretty terrible unless you were like the top 0.5% in ancient Rome. That might have been pretty cool, I guess. But so as we keep going all the way back to, I don't know, Uruk and Sargon of Akkad, we see that it's pretty rough all around. And you making your Reddit post talking about how it's not worth it to have kids and that the United States is in late stage capitalism and it's so unrecoverable. The situation is too bad. We're irredeemable. It's the worst country ever. The worst country ever as compared to what? That's all.